As the war raged on, Stephen went to the Underground Research Institute and gave the researchers a fire crystal from the Elysian realm for analysis. This is an energy crystal from another realm. Can you check if its composition is better than the enhanced gunpowder in our artillery shells? The U.S. had a designated research team for each field. The head researcher in the field of weapons research and development's achievements were on par with Dr. Dalton's in the field of biology and biochemistry. The head researcher shaved off 0.03 grams of powder from the fire crystal and placed it into the molecular oscillator. With a high-speed centrifugal force, the impurities of the crystal were separated to the outermost layer, while the rest will be processed using microscopes and computers. The peak value on the screen instantly reached tens of thousands, and the red curve was higher than the head research had ever seen before. It contains an enormous amount of energy. It can reach 20 times the amount of nuclear fusion energy. This is the only theoretical value analyzed by the computer. Due to various factors, the actual numbers will be different when it's used in live combat. We can use it to research and develop high-energy batteries to increase the sustainability of our combat robots. Their current combat radius is around 200 miles. Replacing their battery with this energy crystal will increase it to over 1,000 miles. If we succeed, it'll be a significant breakthrough. Stephen gave his approval. Combat robots were rarely used on the battlefield because they consumed a large amount of energy even when they weren't carrying firepower. I'll leave it to you. You don't have to worry about wasting crystals. I have a lot more. In the afternoon, Warhawk's counterattack weakened. Their firing frequency decreased rapidly, and their aircrafts vanished from the border. They were relying solely on their satellites to observe the U.S. fortress. Stephen had expected this. With the port and airports in ruins, Warhawk's transportation channels with Maplewood had been cut off. They would have to be frugal with their remaining supplies. It's time for us to visit Scotty. Their military strength is one of the best in the world. The war has been going on for a while, but they haven't expressed their stance yet. We should speak with them before Warhawk tries to win them over. Scotty is neutral, Jace said. They value their energy business more than anything. They're not benefiting from joining the war. Let's have a talk with them and gauge their stance first. The vast majority of Scotty's territory was covered in snow and ice. Their population was distributed in the eastern region of the country. Scotty and the U.S. were located close to one another. They were near the Vergless Strait, and both countries prospered from international trade. Stephen and Jace's flight to Scotty's fortress was smooth. When they stepped off the plane, they found Scotty's military advisor waiting for them. Welcome to Scotty, Mr. Adams. We weren't informed in advance, so your trip was a bit rushed. We hope you don't mind. Not at all. I had important matters to discuss, so there wasn't time to go through all the diplomatic procedures. Stephen and Jace's paper-thin suits were out of place compared to the military advisor's winter combat suit. But as martial artists with fairly high cultivation in human realm standards, they weren't affected by the natural environment. Scotty's city by the border was the same as it had been decades ago. The permanent layer of frost and frequent snowstorms made it difficult to renovate the city, so there was a limit to how modernized it could be. The military advisor invited Stephen and Jace into the fortress. What brings you here, Mr. Adams? He asked when they were seated. The U.S. has the upper hand on both fronts. You can't be here to ask for reinforcements, right? I see Scotty's information network's been working overtime, Stephen replied with a laugh. You know exactly what's happening at our borders. The battle's been going on for some time, and I want to move the battlefield to Warhawk's mainland. The military advisor's eyes widened. Fighting locally will increase the difficulty of the war. You've been holding your ground because the battlefield is in your territory, but you'll lose all your advantages if you attack Warhawk. Long-range attacks won't be as effective. Their air defense system is too advanced. The military advisor's responsibility was to observe Warhawk, which was located to the east of Scotty on the other side of the Vergless Strait. Warhawk had numerous fortresses, and they dominated the land, ocean, and the air. The battle is unavoidable, Stephen said. I'm here to request permission to station my troops at Scotty's eastern border. If we take over Vergless Strait, we can manage it together. You can control the entry and exit of ships from other countries, and the rich marine materials and energy resources will be yours alone. Your advantage in the international energy business will increase. Vergless Strait was a public area, but Scotty had a large number of ports in its waters, and it was unofficially considered their territory. They'd been wanting to officially take over this part of the ocean for themselves, but due to restrictions from the international treaty and interference from Warhawk and Maplewood, they never had a chance. If Stephen succeeded, the benefits would be too good to pass up. Not to mention, Scotty would need to pay that much of a price. Their eastern border was vast and sparsely populated. If Warhawk retaliated with firepower, there wouldn't be any significant losses. "I'll inform the military higher-ups about your request," the military advisor said. "You'll have to wait for them to make a decision." "Sure, that's not a problem." The ruler of every empire was ambitious, and Scotty's military was no exception. Their higher-ups didn't take long to approve of Stephen's plan. No matter how strong Warhawk and Maplewood were, Stephen would step in if the U.S. was on the verge of losing. He was one of the strongest martial artists to exist, and there was no battle he couldn't win. 3 days later, the U.S. and Scotty issued a joint statement. A private security company would be constructing a base at Scotty's eastern border. Before sending troops to attack the other side of the Vergless Strait, they had to make sufficient preparations. Troops, weapons, and equipment had to be transported. With the training base as a cover, no one would question their legitimacy. Meanwhile, Warhawk and Maplewood were growing nervous. They didn't have a clear advantage in Cadiz or Mifflin. During the past few days, they'd caught wind of unusual activity at Scotty's eastern border. They mobilized the reconnaissance satellites to film the scene and discovered armored railguns camouflaged in the snow. There were more than 1,000 of them. They began to question if this was really the work of a private security company. It didn't make sense for these weapons to be theirs. Maplewood's military advisor, Walter, and Warhawk's head Senator Paxton arranged a meeting and demanded an explanation from the commander of the Coastal Guards. What the hell is going on? Why are U.S. troops in Scotty's territory? The official answer is that they're participating in a joint project facilitated by a private security company. Scotty permits the project, and we can't directly interfere. The commander of the Coastal Guards understood the gravity of the problem, but he wasn't sure if they had the strength to interfere in Scotty's affairs. It was easy to launch an attack at Scotty's eastern border, but it might cause them to change their neutral stance. Walter and Paxton stood in front of the screen, frowning as they looked at the high-quality equipment. Since the establishment of their two countries, their homelands had never once been attacked. If they let this happen, it would become an irreversible stain on their careers. Dispatch 100,000 troops to defend our coast and tell Air Patrol to fly around Vergless Strait to monitor Scotty's eastern border closely. Contact the International Petroleum Supply Group and adjust the price of international crude oil to suppress them. Walter raised an objection. Our heavy industry is well developed. It'll be affected by the price of international oil. It's hard to say if this will restrict Scotty, but it's definitely going to affect the production and trade of domestic industrial products. It's clear that the U.S. and Scotty are working together, Paxton argued. We can't do nothing. Our oil reserves will last for around 20 days. We can offer it up to the international market and help suppress the price. We'll stop when Scotty understands that they should back down from this war. The International Petroleum Supply Group's resources came from low-end industries. High-tech products depended on imports. There was a limit to what they could do in the face of a world power, but this wasn't the first time they'd worked together with Warhawk to control the price of energy. At least they would obtain some amount of benefits. While Walter and Paxton were patrolling the coastline and setting up defenses, Farid sent out the information to Stephen. The battle at the eastern U.S. border was intensifying. Both sides were going all out, but no matter how much the battle escalated, the commander of the eastern U.S. military base couldn't push the front lines with his team until they decreased the number of Warhawk's troops. Maplewood's military advisor and Warhawk's head senator are inspecting the coast. They've caught on to your plan. That's not a bad thing, Stephen said. What do you mean? They're stationing troops as we speak, and they're preparing for an all-out war. It doesn't matter. I'll strike first. Stephen ended the call and gave the order to attack. The armored tanks spread out over the snowy terrain of Scotty's eastern border with one target, the coastline across Vergless Strait. Their enhanced cannons with an improved electromagnetic pulse propulsion system increased the firing range to more than 1,000 miles. It was on par with a medium-sized missile, The artillery didn't need a guidance system. It would be effective wherever it landed. The U.S. military's higher-ups were surprised by Stephen's sudden order to attack. Even with Farad's timely information, they thought this was a bit hasty. But if they succeeded in getting rid of the two big shots from Maplewood and Warhawk, they'd be one step closer to winning the war. In just a few minutes, more than 100,000 shells landed on the coast. The cloud of smoke and dust reflected over the icy waters. The artificial soldiers on the land, sea, and air were paralyzed. Or rather, they had disappeared into the flames. The range of each shell reached over 10 miles, and when the shock waves were taken into account, the overall damage was shocking. When fighter jets from Warhawk were spotted, Stephen instructed the team to leave the armored vehicles behind and retreat. The team was well trained. At his signal, they headed west and hid in the forest. An intense round of air raids and bombings took place soon after. Scotty's snowy plateau was enveloped in smoke and flames. The armored railguns stopped flying after their ammunition was used up. Their purpose was to attract Warhawk's attention and give the team time to evacuate. There were no casualties. Everyone hid in the forest on the mountain, thinking about how to fight the next battle. We need to transport more weapons and equipment. It'll take around 1 to 2 days. In the meantime, I'll lead the team and force our way to the coast. The military's higher-ups tried to dissuade Stephen. Mr. Adams, you're an ascender. If you recklessly participate in our world's conflicts, your cultivation could be affected. I'm just going to be a commander. I won't do anything else. More than half of the coast had been bombarded. It wouldn't be a problem for them to land. Stephen's subordinates were capable, and he could leave the battle to them. But Parodi and Cove could show up at any time. He had to be prepared. Warhawk's fighter jets continued to circle overhead, bombing the targets in the snow. It wasn't until the sky began to darken that the fire output showed signs of stopping. Media outlets from around the world waited for an official news announcement, but the U.S., Scotty, Maplewood, and Warhawk remained silent. They were busy mobilizing their troops and preparing for a large-scale war. Scotty's military advisor arranged warships from the U.S. Army to invade the coastline in the middle of the night. They were equipped with firepower and an advanced satellite guidance system. He admired Stephen for commanding the army. It was rare for the leader of a country to voluntarily set foot on the front lines and take the lead. Maplewood and Warhawk's officials fell into chaos. Walter and Paxton's whereabouts were unknown after the attack today. They had high positions, but they were humans made of flesh and blood. It was possible they'd been turned to ashes by artillery fire. The representatives of Warhawk's parliament gathered for an emergency meeting. The U.S. dared to attack the coast. Our losses are significant. We have to make them pay with their blood. The air defense intercepting system isn't 100% effective. We could bomb Annapolis with our intercontinental missiles. If we fire enough, we'll turn their city into a sea of fire. Before you make ridiculous suggestions, why don't you first take a look at the weapons they've developed? If we attack Annapolis, they'll annihilate our capital. Nothing will be left. The representatives discussed furiously. Although it was the coast that was bombed, the flames of war had spread to the capital, leading to a domino effect. The bombardment of the coast had affected some of the representatives' family businesses, while other representatives saw a sharp decline in their investments in the stock market. News of the incident at the coast had caused the stock prices to plummet. Financial groups from all over the country had withdrawn their investments and were preparing to leave the country as soon as possible. Their patience was running thin, and they'd lost confidence in Warhawk. This was the exact opposite of when the war in Cadiz had begun. The representatives quieted down when a familiar figure strode onto the platform. It was a middle-aged woman dressed in a suit. Every representative knew who she was. It was the previous head senator, Merrill. She hadn't made too many mistakes during her final term. When Paxton was met with misfortune, the representatives had invited her to temporarily assume her previous position and save the situation. Merrill's gaze swept over the crowd as she cleared her throat. Thank you for the trust, everyone. It's because of all of you that I'm able to stand here today and fight side by side with the country once more. We've lost the initiative, but our military has arranged for 1 million troops to set off from the coast. All ports are on high alert. They'll sink any enemy ship on sight. Before the meeting, Merrill had discussed countermeasures with the military's higher-ups for several hours. Attacking Annapolis wasn't a smart move. They couldn't risk retaliation because the U.S. was perfectly capable of destroying Warhawk's capital. If that became their last resort, then they would bite the bullet and carry out negotiations with the U.S. Another round of bad news came from the front lines and interrupted Merrill's speech. Scotty's fleet was sailing towards the coast and launching an attack on Warhawk's warships. This was evidence of the U.S. and Scotty's alliance. Reinforcements from Warhawk's nearest fortress were rushing to the coast, but it was too late to stop Scotty's advance. When their fleet docked, a battle on land would erupt. "How long will it take for reinforcements to arrive?" Merrill asked. 7 hours, the commander replied. "But they won't make it in time. Once Scotty's fleet crosses the Vergless Strait, their troops will take over the coast." The situation was urgent, and Merrill decided to contact Maplewood. The coastline was an enclave surrounded by Maplewood and Warhawk. If war broke out on land, Maplewood would be the first country to be affected. Before ending communication with the commander, she asked, "Did you find Walter or Paxton's bodies?" "It's too chaotic at the coast. Our team is retreating to a safe area. We won't be able to carry out any more missions for the time being." Tonight would be a sleepless night for everyone in Maplewood. While reinforcements were rushing to the coast, the wealthy families began their escape on private planes. Ordinary people began to stock up on food and medical supplies. Supermarkets, pharmacies, and banks were robbed. The local police stations were no longer able to maintain order. Stephen was on the deck of Scotty's fleet. He could see the outline of Warhawk's coast from the burning flames. When their ships docked, a team of several hundred troops smoothly invaded the coast unhindered. Their plan was to follow the coastline to Maplewood's border and stop there. They would then wait for Maplewood's troops to retreat to the city. Stephen had a deep understanding of Maplewood's military. As long as the war didn't affect their country, they wouldn't join in at their full strength. His goal was to stall for as much time as they could for more troops, weapons, and equipment to be transported to Scotty before occupying the coast. With their numbers, it was unrealistic to push forward. Jace was circling the skies above in a jet, commanding a combat robot to attack Maplewood's border. The head researchers of weapons and development had replaced the robot's battery with a fire crystal, and this was the first test. Stephen stood at a vantage point overlooking the country of Maplewood. There was no movement at the border. For Warhawk's reinforcements to reach the coast, they would have to cross the highway on Maplewood's territory, but there was no sign of them. Were they caught up in an internal disagreement? Suddenly, Stephen sensed two familiar auras. It was Parodi and Cove. From the pressure of their auras, it was clear that they would be fighting without holding anything back this time. Parodi and Cove brandished their weapons. "You are really hard to kill. You even survived the City Lord challenge." "Your fellow students from the Mystic Covenant left the human realm already. Who else do you have by your side? You won't be leaving today until you're dead." Stephen's cultivation had reached the peak of the silver rank. He hadn't broken through to the gold rank yet, but there was a big difference between Nadorun and his team members. They didn't have reinforcements, so he might be able to fend them off. The three of them lunged at each other, leaving after images streaking across the night sky. The coast was once again filled with dust and smoke. Jace had already confirmed that there was no one remaining at the border with the combat robot and ordered the team to retreat back. The team had never seen the ancient cultivators in battle, and they were wondering if they could provide backup for Stephen. Jace turned on the radar and aimed it at the location of the explosions in the sky to capture the battle. The team was confused when they saw dozens of red dots flash on the screen. Stephen and his two enemies were the only ones in the sky. Where were these red dots coming from? "They're too fast, and the residual energy left behind in their after images confuses the radar," Jace explained. "Our weapons are advanced, but they won't be able to lock onto our enemies." The team could only stay far away and watch the flashes of explosions in the sky. Martial artists from the human realm couldn't see their movements clearly. They could only hear the sound of swords clashing and explosions shaking the earth with their energy crashed into the ground. After hundreds of rounds, Stephen sheathed his sword. Parodi and Cove's bodies were indestructible, and his sword couldn't leave a scratch on them. He took out the wooden cane from Luciano instead. "Were you a cripple?" Parodi said mockingly. "We might as well sever your legs." "That would take care of the problem at its roots," Cove added. Stephen struck without warning. Roots extended from the end of the cane. They grew at an unnatural speed, and they were so fast that Parodi and Cove couldn't dodge in time. The roots wrapped around them, holding them in place. They condensed their energy on their skin to burn the bindings, but the more they struggled, the tighter the roots became. Stephen tugged on the cane, and the roots dragged Parodi and Cove towards him. His fist hit them square in the chest, but his energy couldn't invade their bodies. Cove opened his mouth, releasing a ball of energy. Stephen had to leap back to avoid it. The energy burst, setting off a violent explosion that dispersed the clouds covering the moon. Black smoke drifted from Parodi's mouth. Its corrosive effects caused the roots to wither, freeing them from their bindings. "That's an interesting weapon. Was it made from an ancient plant?" "That's none of your concern," Stephen said, rushing towards them for another round. At this time, Warhawk and Maplewood were in the middle of negotiations, discussing how to fight the war that was rapidly approaching their homelands. Maplewood's aircrafts were hovering over the border, monitoring the U.S. Army. For some reason, the U.S. had stopped their invasion. Maybe their invasion is purely out of revenge. If you withdraw your forces from Cadus, they'll leave the coast. Warhawk's princes disagreed with Maplewood's military higher-ups. "Don't be so optimistic. The former sovereign is personally leading the army. He won't be satisfied until he achieves his goal. The coast is only the beginning. When they finish transporting their weapons and equipment to Scotty, it'll be over for us." Maplewood's military higher-ups prioritized peace and the preservation of their country more than anything. War wouldn't benefit them. Is there no other way except to confront them directly? Warhawk's princes dismissed their concerns. "I don't know why you're all so afraid. We've arranged a fleet of artificial soldiers and combat robots. They're on their way. At dawn, an army of over 100,000 will be ready to fight at your border. The battlefield is in our territory. Why didn't you discuss your plan with us before going ahead with it?" Warhawk's princes scoffed. "The sun will be up in a few hours. If you really wanted peace, why didn't you contact the U.S. for negotiations?" Maplewood's military higher-ups didn't have an answer. Their country was a world power. Initiating negotiations was an act of surrender. They could never do something so shameful. The battle in the night sky went on for nearly an hour. Thousands of blows had been exchanged. A single mistake would have been fatal, but Stephen, Parodi, and Cove were all unharmed. Stephen summoned the Zodiac monkey and dog. The monkey increased its size until it towered over Parodi and Cove and swung its metal rod at them. Their swords were as small and fragile as a tree branch compared to the metal rod. The impact knocked them off balance. The dog bared its teeth and charged at Parodi and Cove, prepared to bite them to death. Its teeth were sharp, but they only left a few shallow scratches on them. "The two beasts are fierce," Parodi commented. "I wonder how they'll taste." "These beasts see cultivators as prey," Stephen said. "When they eat you, or you eat them, we won't know until the end." Stephen cast his domain of hellfire. Blue flames spread across the sky. They gradually absorbed spiritual energy from Parodi and Cove as they fought with the beasts. Their swords were useless against them. Parodi and Cove abandoned their weapons and relied on their brute strength. They ignored the massive Zodiac monkey and targeted the smaller Zodiac dog instead. Parodi increased his speed and dashed behind the Zodiac dog as Cove swung his fist towards its head. It was an insignificant blow, but the gust of wind swept up the sand and stone from the shore and blocked the dog's vision. Just as Parodi grabbed the dog's tail, Stephen condensed the blue flames into a snake. It coiled around Parodi's arm, but he wasn't shaken. He tightened his grip on the dog's tail and slammed the beast into the ground, creating a deep crater. Beasts were known for their sturdy exterior and high defenses. An attack of this level did nothing but provoke the Zodiac dog. The blue flames on Parodi's arm burned brighter and drained more of his spiritual energy. As the flames spread, he flung the dog into the air. Cove followed up with a well-coordinated fist. Before his punch could land, the Zodiac monkey wrapped its tail around his waist, pulling him back, and slammed its metal rod against the back of his head. Cove staggered as the stars filled his vision. This split-second opening was all Stephen needed. He dropped the furnace next to Cove and shoved him inside. The ancient furnace had the ability to refine anything in the world. Not even Cove's indestructible body could withstand its flames. His scream lasted for only a second before he was turned to ashes. Everything had happened so fast that Parodi didn't have time to react. He thought it would be easy to kill Stephen, but his beasts were much harder to deal with than he'd heard. The Zodiac dog pounced with snapping jaws, but Parodi had lost his will to fight. He turned into a streak of light and disappeared into the night. There was no point in staying in the human realm alone. He couldn't take down Stephen's beasts on his own. He found a remote and quiet space and opened a spatial rift to return to the Elysian realm. The dog laid down, examining the furnace curiously. "Your weapons are getting weirder." Stephen brushed the sand from its fur. "If it weren't for this furnace, it would have been much harder to get rid of them." "So what's the plan?" the monkey asked, eyeing the reinforcements approaching the border. "Should we wipe them out?" "No, that's not our goal," Stephen replied. "We're going to slowly occupy Maplewood, starting from the coast." Soon, Scotty's transport ships began to sail back and forth across Verglas Strait. They'd heard about the outcome of the battle and couldn't wait to send their troops to assist the U.S. News of the mercenaries' deaths during the City Lord Challenge reached the Mercenary Guilds Alliance. The 3 guild leaders were infuriated as a new grudge was added to their accumulating list. The Falcon Guild leader was especially angry. Not only had her beloved student, Monica, been killed by one of Stephen's beasts, but 2 of her other students had also perished. "He's just a silver rank cultivator. Why is it so hard to get rid of him?" The Demon Hunter and Thousand Hands Guild's leaders were wondering the same thing. "Why are you getting worked up?" the Demon Hunter Guild leader said. "The Falcon Guild has suffered losses, but our prized alchemist died a violent death, and Stephen stole his furnace. The value of an alchemist can't be compared to a regular cultivator. His cultivation pills were hard to come by, even in the black market." "Are you trying to say that my students' lives aren't as valuable as your alchemist?" the Falcon Guild leader demanded. The tension in the room rose. Everyone's mood was ruined because of Stephen. The Thousand Hands Guild leader quickly intervened. "Now's not the time to quarrel about losses. We need to come up with a new plan. Stephen's still alive. We don't have the formula for the strengthening liquid, and the 3rd round has been postponed. All of our efforts have gone down the drain." When he mentioned the formula, the Falcon Guild leader's anger shifted to NATO-Run's team. They'd helped them escape from the Mystic Covenant and even gave them medicinal pills. But NATO-Run hadn't shown an ounce of gratitude. He and his team had left the moment they recovered. Those ungrateful traitors must be hiding somewhere in the Elysian realm. They're familiar with this realm, so it's the safest place for them. Has anyone seen them around lately? There are rumors that they attacked the Infinite Prison. Then let's focus on finding them before anything else. Our extensive information network is our biggest advantage. When we meet, we'll offer them a deal. We'll continue to hide them if they give us the formula. If not, then we'll hand them over to Zenith Council in exchange for a reward. As for Stephen, he's been demoted in the faction because he participated in the challenge. If he participates in the 3rd round, we'll send people to deal with him then." The Demon Hunter and the Thousand Hands Guild leaders agreed. Neither of them wanted to send their mercenaries to the human realm. They couldn't afford to waste any more time and people on Stephen. Their decision reduced the number of threats in the human realm, which gave the Bellantine family time to catch their breath. The head of the family called his daughter to his office to make new arrangements. A large portion of the wealth their family had accumulated for years had declined when Minori City was almost destroyed. Their mercenary guild was made up of experienced members, but the guild was small and unranked. They almost went bankrupt. If the Bellantine family continued to decline like this, their enemies would seize the opportunity and wipe them out. "How's the security company in the human realm doing?" Vivian's father asked when she stepped into the office. "Now that the Mercenary Guilds Alliance is busy with other things, we should take this time to strengthen our forces." Vivian had stayed in the Elysian realm to help manage the family's business after Minori City almost fell to ruins. She hadn't had time to go back to the human realm to check on her family's mercenaries or contact Stephen about her security company. "The U.S. is supporting our businesses in the human realm. They're probably doing fine. Why do you ask?" The Bellantine family was gradually declining, and as the head, it was Vivian's father's responsibility to get them through the crisis. The Mercenary Guilds Alliance spent a large sum of money to hire talented cultivators. Some of our mercenaries left the guild after the meteor struck the city. We don't have enough people. I heard from the Sullivan family that Stephen will be going to the Asura realm soon. Can you go with them and recruit more members? It was no secret that Stephen was on friendly terms with the celestial beast in the Asura realm, and Vivian's father wanted to learn from him. Ascension wasn't the only way to enter the Elysian realm. There were weapons that could open spatial rifts like Stephen's bone blade, while the Asuras were permitted entry after negotiations with the Mystic Covenant. The Elysian realm was on a higher plane, and there was more spiritual energy than the Asura realm. Vivian's father's radical plan was to convince some of the beasts to join their guild for a better cultivation environment. Vivian wasn't sure how well this would turn out, but she agreed to give it a try. At dawn, Maplewood's border at the coast became the threshold to hell. Chaos ensued as troops from the U.S., Scotty, and Warhawk flooded the area. The commander of the eastern U.S. military base reported to Stephen that Warhawk had ceased their attacks. Their army had disappeared from the fortresses and seemed to be evacuating. "Did Cadus's king send anyone to contact you?" Stephen asked. "Not yet. It's either he's getting more timid, or he doesn't understand the position he's in." In Stephen's opinion, the war in Cadus had already been decided. Their ports and airports were in ruins. Weapons, ammunition, and medical supplies couldn't be transported into the country. "Press the advantage and take over the royal city." "Yes, sir." The invasion of Cadus had finally begun. It was a one-sided battle. Damaris and Farid were hiding in the forest, asking for help from Warhawk, but the higher-ups' answer was disappointing. The Parliament was prioritizing the war at the coastline. Sending reinforcements to Cadus would not be possible. Damaris angrily snapped his phone in half after ending the call. "This isn't what I signed up for when I took over Natasha's mess. There's no way we can win this war without reinforcements." "We have 15% of our supplies left," Farid said calmly. "The U.S. is sending at least 5,000 armored tanks after us. The ammunition we have is far from enough. Should we surrender?" "Don't you have any pride?" Damaris snapped. "It's not up to us to decide." "I'm making this suggestion on behalf of ordinary martial artists in our team, including you and me. We're not products manufactured in a factory. We're human, and we're very much alive. We need to survive. The biggest reason for our failure is Natasha's mistakes. I can give a detailed explanation to the military when we return." Damaris was moved by Farid's passionate speech. He was right. If they stayed, they'd be wiped out by the U.S. Army. Surrendering and becoming their captives of war was a much better option. Ethical and moral guidelines had to be followed in accordance with international conventions when captives of war were taken into custody. If they complied with the interrogation, their safety would be guaranteed. Damaris ordered the captains and the other human martial artists of their team to retreat as the artificial soldiers remained at the border to buy them time. Damaris took Farid to the Imperial Palace to see the king. Everyone in the palace could hear the gunfire rapidly approaching. Their faces were ashen as they waited for the end of the world. Javon wasn't in the mood to meet with Damaris and Farid. He mumbled a greeting when they entered the hall. "Your Highness, you should understand how urgent our situation is right now," Damaris said. "The U.S. Army's occupying every city they pass by." "And whose fault do you think this is?" Javon asked. If it weren't for Warhawk and Maplewood's ambitions, Cadus wouldn't have been dragged into the conflict. He'd ordered the remaining city guards to protect the royal family, but they were nothing compared to the U.S. Army. They were mostly there for emotional comfort. If you want to fight, then go ahead. If you want to rest, then stay for a cup of tea. But don't expect us to lend you a hand. Our national treasury's been emptied. That's not it. We're here to ask you to contact the former sovereign and request to resolve the conflict in a peaceful nature. Javon was widely known to be weak, but as Cadus's king, he had more authority than Damaris and Farid. They were just two ordinary martial artists in charge of the front lines. Javon had the authority to personally give Stephen a call and speak on the same level. "Are you trying to push me into the fire pit? Whether I want to or not, I'll be meeting with the former sovereign when the U.S. Army invades. Please take a good look at the situation in front of you. The U.S. Army's determined to take over Cadus. After they annihilate our army, are you certain they won't just blow up the palace and end your regime?" Realization dawned on Javon. With no other choice, he made the call with shaky fingers. Stephen and Jace were at the coast, watching the ships coming and going. Scotty had been left in charge of the battle. They were a major world power, and they had a formidable army. While they were engrossed in conversation, Stephen's phone rang. Your Highness, are you sure you have time to chat with me? Have you given up on your country? Mr. Adams, please spare my life. We and Warhawk's troops will surrender unconditionally, Javon pleaded. He spoke quickly, worried that a cannonball would land on his head if he hesitated for even a second. Stephen knew exactly what was happening in Cadiz. The U.S. Army would occupy the royal city in less than 24 hours, but he hadn't decided what to do after that. What does Warhawk's commander think? He agrees to an unconditional surrender, Javon replied. He's willing to negotiate the conditions. Then tell him to contact Warhawk and prepare compensation. We'll let Warhawk's army go once they get the money. Understood. I'll pass on the message. Javon breathed a sigh of relief when he hung up. Resolving the conflict with money wasn't a problem for Warhawk and Maplewood. Even if the U.S. demanded an exorbitant price, they would have a way to settle it. What came next was a complicated process of rounding up Warhawk's army and taking them into custody. The tedious task was left to the commander of the Eastern U.S. military base and his team. Are you really going to send them back? Jace asked. We have no use for them. It's a waste of resources to keep them in the U.S. The war in Cadiz was just a game to Warhawk's higher-ups. The real battle is here, at the coast. How much money do you think we'll need to rebuild Cadiz? 100 billion? Maybe we should start with 300 billion and negotiate from there. That afternoon, international media outlets broadcasted an update on the war in Cadiz. The surrender agreement would be signed in the Imperial Palace with King Javon Lorenz as the witness. Damaris and Farid represented Warhawk, while the commander of the Eastern U.S. military base represented the Sovereign. The live broadcast had a deep impact on the other war zones. Warhawk's allies were shaken, and their generals on the front line contacted their superiors in their respective countries, requesting to give up on the war. The two military advisors from Mifflin were summoned back home for a report. Mifflin's king had evacuated to a remote island in the country to escape the conflict from the front. Can the war continue? We're wasting resources to sustain their army, but they haven't made any progress. The U.S. is officially taking over Cadiz. They'll have an even larger army. The military advisors chose their words carefully. The troops from Warhawk and their allies haven't won any battles. All they've done is stay in the villages at the edge of the desert. They're too afraid to attack the U.S. border or the command center on the Aratai Mountains. Why don't we make an announcement and inform the public that we've decided to cancel our alliance with Warhawk? It's a sign of surrender. We can contact the U.S. and negotiate. The king turned down their suggestion. Lake Isaiah was one of the most important water sources in Mifflin. If they surrendered, the lake would fall into the U.S.'s hands. The peace talks won't be in our favor unless we win a few major battles. Tell Warhawk and their allies' army to launch an attack right now. If they refuse, then we'll cut off their supply of resources immediately. If we don't force them into a dead end, we won't know what they're truly capable of. The military advisors carried out the order, and peace in the Aratai Mountains was broken. This was something that Stephen hadn't expected. Warhawk and their allies' army's long-range fire enveloped the entrance to the mountains and some of the cities. The U.S. Army shut down the hydropower stations and power plants and evacuated the civilians as they organized a counterattack. The desert terrain made armored vehicles inconvenient. Long-range attacks via artillery or air raids were more effective. Explosions swept across the desert. As the commander of the Unsetting Sun Empire, MacArthur was one of the leaders of the Allied army. He'd been under a lot of pressure ever since he joined the war, but now he'd been driven into a corner. Mifflin had forced them to escalate the conflict, and the United States' retaliation was equally fierce. Warhawk and Maplewood were too busy with the war on the coast to pay attention to Mifflin. MacArthur paced back and forth at the command post, but he couldn't come up with a way to get out of this. Their current situation was the same as when the war first started. At that time, they didn't have the means to attack the U.S. Nothing had changed in the past few weeks. MacArthur's subordinates came to report. We had 24,000 soldiers divided into 12 combat squads. We've lost contact with them. The remaining forces at the edge of the desert are at risk. Should we arrange for them to retreat? No. Order them to launch a full-scale attack on the Aratai Mountains. His subordinate tried to reason with him. There was a big difference between their firepower and the United States'. Courage wouldn't close the gap. It would be better to lay low and wait for Warhawk and their allies to initiate a truce and negotiate with the U.S. Sir, please think this over. 24,000 lives have already been lost. If we attack now, we might lose everyone. Obeying orders is a soldier's duty, MacArthur said. Pass on the order immediately. MacArthur's subordinates had no choice but to leave. When they were alone, the other commanders cast wary glances at MacArthur. His order would result in heavy casualties. Who knew when it would be their turn to go out on the front lines and sacrifice their lives meaninglessly? MacArthur ignored their stares. He needed a legitimate reason, like heavy casualties, to convince Warhawk's higher-ups to surrender. Warhawk had pushed for the war, and they had to be the ones to end it. In the evening, there was no sign of either war stopping anytime soon. Stephen left the command of the front lines at the coast to Jace and went back to Annapolis. With sufficient ammunition, manpower, and advanced weapons, Stephen couldn't think of any reason they would lose the war. When the ice dragon landed on the rooftop of the villa, he sensed a familiar aura approaching the house. Vivian appeared in a flash of light. "Long time no see," Stephen said, dismounting the ice dragon. "What brings you here?" "Family business, of course. Aren't you going to invite me inside?" Stephen invited her into the house, and they talked as they gathered around the dining table for dinner. When there was no competition between those in the same industry, it was normal for the weaker competitor to lose their footing. The Bellantine family's mercenary guild was skilled, but they weren't as big as the Mercenary Guild's alliance. When the two wars are over, peace will return to the human realm. However you want to develop your security company, my country will give you their full support. "Thanks, but that's not why I'm here," Vivian explained her father's plan of recruiting new members from the Asura realm. Since Stephen was close with the celestial beast, she was hoping for him to introduce her to potential candidates. Stephen had his doubts about their plan. "I don't know. I can't think of anyone except the Asuras or the beasts. Both of their species thrive in war and bloodshed. It's hard to say if they'll work with your family." "I have to try," Vivian said. "If we fail, we'll have to close down our family business." She was insistent, and Stephen decided to bring her along. He'd be going there soon anyway with the Sky Lion. He had 3 days to prepare. A compensation of $300 billion in exchange for the safe return of Warhawk's army was a painful price to pay for Maplewood and Warhawk, but the international media was paying close attention to the end of the war in Cadiz. The soldiers in Mifflin and Maplewood's border near the coast had access to the latest news. If they failed to pay, the soldiers' morale would be shaken. They would be afraid that one day they would become captives of war abandoned by their motherland. After a brief negotiation, the final compensation decreased to $280 billion. Even Stephen was surprised by how little Warhawk and Maplewood had negotiated. The U.S. had always been known for their obsession with reconstruction. It wouldn't be hard for them to restore Cadiz to its original state. The compensation would fund the construction and make up for the losses the war had caused. When negotiations ended, Javon and his ministers couldn't wait to board a plane to the U.S. Stephen asked his subordinates to arrange the usual reception for them. During the war, Javon and his ministers had to cut back on food expenses to fund the army and provide for civilians. They'd missed the aroma of meat, but they couldn't bring themselves to taste the dishes until they pleaded their case. "Mr. Adams, with how quickly you resolved the crisis in our country, I believe the same will happen for the other 2 battlefields." "You don't have to flatter me. If you have something important to say, just say it." "We didn't close our borders or assist Warhawk's army and the Alliance Security Company because we wanted to. We were threatened." "Don't worry, I won't hold it against you." Javon and the ministers let out a sigh of relief. They were finally in the mood to eat. They wanted to help rebuild Cadiz as soon as possible, but it would take some time before the national treasury filled up again. Stephen proposed a non-commercial project. Because of the war, the unemployment rate in Cadiz is at an all-time high. Most of the civilians' living standards are below the poverty line. There's a lot of construction to be done. If they help out, their meals and housing will be taken care of for free. "How should we pay for their wages and construction materials?" Javon asked. "Sign an IOU with the U.S. Your future taxes will be used as repayment. We'll provide the other resources free of charge." There was no room for Javon to bargain, and the matter was settled. But Stephen had another issue to deal with after that. The Alliance Security Company had stopped their operations, and the mercenaries from the Elysian realm had disappeared. Nate and his subordinates had miraculously survived the front lines and fled to Cadiz's outskirts. "Nate's still alive? I don't know why the mercenaries made him the CEO. He's not even a martial artist." He probably went to the front lines for an inspection, Stephen's subordinate said. He didn't have any real authority, so he found a random place to hide. Charge him with desertion and put him and his people in prison. He conspired with the enemy, so this is considered a lenient punishment. The war at the coast wouldn't end anytime soon. Both sides had invested in a large amount of resources, and it had become a competition of consumption. The battle was fierce, but the number of casualties was minor. As for Mifflin, Warhawk and their allies' army was about to be defeated. MacArthur had taken out all his weapons and equipment and launched a general attack, but it was hard to push forward in difficult terrain like the desert. Stephen predicted that in a week, either Mifflin or the Allied army would make a request for peace negotiations. It's time to go. I'll bring you to the Asura realm, but I don't know if you'll find anyone. Beasts are different from ordinary cultivators. They don't want the same things. Vivian nodded. I'll keep my expectations low. Stephen opened a spatial rift with the bone blade. The swirling galaxies shone brightly as he and Vivian crossed to the other side. When they reached the Asura realm, they mounted the ice dragon and headed over the Myriad Mountains. Stephen was surprised by how quickly the beasts had built not one, but over 100 cities surrounding the mountains. The area they took up was almost half of the United States' territory. Why did they build so many cities? Vivian asked curiously. There's enough buildings to accommodate the beasts, but it's not in line with their usual habits. Many of them are still wandering the wilderness. Half of the buildings are empty. Many of the beasts in the Asura realm were used to living in the wild. Transforming into a human and living in modern buildings wasn't a necessity. They could live freely in the forests, grasslands, and deserts. I think the celestial beast is trying to introduce the concept of organizational discipline and teamwork to the beasts, Stephen replied. Executing complex strategies and fighting in a group has always been their weakness. They chose to fight independently even when they're gathered. It's different from humans who set up arrays and devise strategic formations during a battle. The beasts were strong from birth, and Stephen believed that with Killian at the helm, their species would be much more powerful within the next 100 years. When the ice dragon landed at the foot of the mountain, Killian's follower Briar came over to greet them. The Sky Lion had already brought the beasts from the Abyss and the Asura realm. Because of the difference in the flow of time between realms, Stephen and Vivian had arrived in the middle of their discussion. Briar led them to the summit, where Killian was having a meeting with the beasts from the Abyss. Stephen saw the woman in a purple dress sitting at the table with a small group of young men and women. He assumed they were her companions who'd taken on human forms. Long time no see, Killian greeted him with a smile. I heard you're doing well in the Elysian realm. Any plans to become a city lord in the future? Stephen joined them at the table with Vivian. Not really. I was just participating to help my friend. The woman had already put forward her request. She was hoping to stay in the Asura realm with her companions for a safe place to cultivate. They had the same ancestors as the beast in the Asura realm, so why not live together? Killian didn't agree right away. Even if they did share the same ancestors, the woman and her companions were outsiders, and he couldn't trust them. He also couldn't read their intentions. Were they really looking for a safe place to cultivate, or were they here to carry out a sinister plan? While he was mulling over their request, Stephen and Vivian came for a visit. He used them as an excuse to postpone their discussion. I need to think it over. There are many factors to consider. As you know, it wasn't easy to unify the beasts in the Asura realm. It's inevitable for conflicts to arise when outsiders are involved. The last thing we want is another war. Killian's tone left no room for discussion. The woman and her companions fell silent. They weren't used to competing with words. They usually used force to achieve their goals. Killian wasn't concealing his aura, and they couldn't sense how powerful he was. They saw this as a challenge, but the woman didn't start a fight. They had come all the way here to meet with the celestial beast, so she could wait a few more days. Their discussion took on a more relaxed tone, and the pleasantries continued until sunset. The beast had a unique method of brewing wine. Even Stephen, who was rarely drunk, felt slightly tipsy. The taste is intoxicating. Are you drunk already? The Sky Lion teased. This is nothing to us beasts. Human liquor is too light. It's worse than the spring water in the mountains. They had made their way to a remote corner on the summit for a private conversation. Stephen had joined the discussion halfway, so he didn't know what they'd talked about at the beginning. How did Killian really feel about those beasts? Did they threaten him? No, they're being careful, the Sky Lion said. We have an army of beasts stationed on the mountain. They'll be flattened if they attack him. Is he planning on letting them stay? When we were talking at the table, he didn't sound too enthusiastic about their presence. Killian acknowledges that they're above average compared to typical beasts, but because there's so many of us and so few of them, it won't make a difference if they join us or not. He also suspects they might have ulterior motives for coming to the Asura realm, but he's curious about the origins of the beasts. He doesn't think it was a coincidence that the Bestia and Revenant realms overlapped in the past, and he wants to find out what really happened. Killian originated in the Asura realm. He doesn't have the ability to open a spatial rift, and he wants to know if it's possible for him to cross to another realm. Stephen was surprised to hear that. I didn't know he thought about these kinds of things. It's not a bad trade. If he lets those beasts stay in the Asura realm, he might get the answers he's looking for. Killian is more of a god than a beast, the Sky Lion said. The way he thinks is more complicated. He's planning an assessment for those beasts tomorrow. Since you have so much free time, you're welcome to join. That piqued Stephen's interest, but when he pressed the Sky Lion for details, he didn't answer. As for Vivian's request, Stephen decided to bring it up after the issue was settled. After the Sky Lion left, the woman in a purple dress sauntered over. Did you miss me? Why are you still here? Shouldn't you be coming up with ways to convince the celestial beast to let you stay? Stephen asked. The woman shrugged. It doesn't matter. The 6 realms are close to each other. If he turns us down, we can try our luck elsewhere. The spatial barrier between realms isn't as indestructible as you think. There are many ways to open rifts. Vivian was bored after eating her fill. Stephen had left to talk to the beasts, leaving her alone at the table with nothing to do. Without him, she didn't know how to break the ice with the beasts around her. She suffered in boredom for 2 more hours before everyone dispersed for the night. The Asura realm was created by the Asura king. He was born in ancient times, and he was the true owner of this realm. There were countless legends about him, but no one knew where he'd gone after ascending. In the legends, the Asura king's golden body was like a relic he left in the realm during ascension. It was said that when certain species ascended, they left their bodies behind or burned them before leaving. The bodies left behind contained their owner's spiritual energy. If Killian could absorb the Asura king's golden body, he might be able to comprehend the secrets of the universe and find out how to freely cross between realms. The next morning, the beasts from the abyss were told the details of their assessment. Killian had found traces of the Asura king's golden body in one of the forbidden areas in the realm, and their task was to get it for him. Stephen and Vivian had nothing to do, so they decided to join them. First, let's head to the location marked on the map, Stephen said. No one knows exactly what the relic looks like, but you'll pass the test if you bring it back safely. The woman transformed into her beast form, and her companions did the same. All right, let's go. The sky in the Asura realm was blood red. The clouds emitted an ominous aura that made it hard to tell if they were headed in the right direction. The woman took the lead, followed by dozens of her companions. Stephen and Vivian followed along on the ice dragon's back. Was it really necessary for us to join? Vivian grumbled. Aren't you curious about the relic at all? Stephen said. Besides, this is your chance to get close to those spiders. Who knows? Maybe one of them will want to work with your family. They look fierce. I don't think they're interested. It took several hours to cross an endless desert of red sand. A chill filled the air as they reached the forest on the other side. The trees were bare. They didn't have leaves, but they did have orange round fruits resembling persimmons. The indentations on their surface made them look somewhat like human faces. We've been encountering a lot of strange things, the woman observed. Maybe we should have asked the celestial beast for a guide. Why didn't you? Stephen asked. Because we won't be able to prove our value unless we complete the task on our own. Our destination isn't far from here. Let's take a break in the forest. The woman's companions were curious about the unusual fruits growing in the trees. They turned into a human and plucked the fruits. As they turned them over in their hands, the outer layer cracked and fell off, revealing a bloody human head inside. The beasts were startled. When they let go, the bloody heads dropped to the forest floor and bore their teeth, trying to bite their ankles. The beasts condensed their energy into the shape of a sword and slashed at the heads rolling at their feet. Their original forms had tentacles for limbs. They didn't have bones. After taking on human form, their bodies were similarly flexible. The heads swiftly evaded the swords. They opened their mouths wide, and soul-stirring howls reverberated across the forest. The beasts weren't affected, but Stephen and Vivian felt like their mind was rattling. A mental interference of this level was beyond their imagination. Stephen went over to a head that had rolled some distance away from the beasts. He took out a wooden cane and restrained it with its roots. "Let go of me. All of you will die in this forest." A high-pitched voice echoed in Stephen's ears. He looked around. No one had a reaction. The head was probably transmitting its voice to him. "I have a question for you. If you answer me, I'll let you go." "Who do you think you are?" the bloody head threatened. "We're everywhere in the forest. We can eat you alive in minutes." Stephen didn't bother arguing with it. He tightened the roots and the bones in the head behind the creek. Another high-pitched squeal echoed in his mind. "Wait, spare me. What do you want to know? I'll tell you everything." According to the bloody head, an ocean was at the end of the forest. Any creature that came in contact with the water lost control of their emotions and went mad. The forest flourished by absorbing the strange water through its roots. The fruits growing on the trees had intelligence, and they attacked any creature that trespassed. Stephen took out the map and looked at it carefully. Their destination was at the center of the ocean. There was no indication of an island. Maybe they would have to dive to the bottom to find the relic. The fruits were capable of paralyzing mental interference. If their abilities were an extension of the water, he and Vivian might not last more than a minute down there. "Do you know if there are beasts in the ocean?" "Never been there before," the bloody head replied. "When the fruits ripen and fall to the ground, we take root and grow into new trees." The head didn't have any more information, so Stephen set it back down, and it rolled away into the depths of the forest. When he turned back, the other heads disappeared in the same fashion, and the beasts lost interest. A dense blanket of fog was beginning to settle over the forest. It was water vapor from the ocean, and it had strong mental interference effects. Stephen mounted the ice dragon with Vivian. "We're going to leave the forest. The mist disrupts our mental energy." "Humans are so weak," the woman drawled. "Where are you going? It's late and the sky's getting dark." "The ocean. You should come with us. You won't find anything in this forest with the fog." Stephen's suggestion was reasonable. If the beasts weren't careful, they could be ambushed in the mist. They didn't know what else was in this forest aside from the strange-looking fruits either. The ice dragon spread its wings and took flight, dispersing the fog as it soared into the sky. Stephen and Vivian felt the haze clouding their minds clear up. They had a clear view of the forest from above. It was a long and narrow boundary separating the desert from the ocean. The woman and her companions joined them in the air and saw their destination. "To us beasts, the night is the perfect time to hunt. We're going to check it out." "Don't be impulsive," Stephen warned. "The water interferes with your mental state." "That won't be a problem for us," the woman signaled to her companions, and they flew towards the vast ocean. Stephen wasn't sure what kind of conflicts would arise if the woman got her companions killed with her bold and reckless actions, but he didn't want to find out. He summoned the iridescent dragon. It enveloped him and Vivian in a bubble to isolate them from the fog's toxic effects. "Don't do anything crazy," the iridescent dragon said, perching on Stephen's shoulder. "The bubble isn't that strong. If it pops, you'll be affected by the mist again." "Got it." Stephen asked the ice dragon to follow the beasts and stop when it sensed danger. The color of the ocean changed depending on the time of day. At night, the water was as black as ink, and during the day, it was as blue as a sapphire. The ice dragon made it to the shore safely. The fog was much denser here than in the forest. The iridescent dragon couldn't figure out why there was such a strong mental interference coming from the ocean. It wasn't a living being. "Do you think the beast is hiding in the water?" "I don't know. If you're curious, feel free to dive into the ocean and swim around." Stephen was daring, but not that daring. However, the woman and her companions were much braver than him. Their beast forms had the characteristics of a spider and an octopus. They had nothing to fear in the water. They turned back into their massive forms and dove into the ocean. The waves rolled, and bubbles appeared on the surface as the ocean shifted. Stephen stared into the inky water, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman and her companions, but there was nothing but darkness. At some point, a dark cloud condensed over the center of the ocean. The waves swirled violently in a vortex as the water was absorbed into the cloud. But nothing happened after that. There was no storm, and the cloud remained the same size. Where did the water go? He suspected that there was an array engraved in the cloud. The ice dragon flew over the ocean, and Stephen slashed with his sword, releasing a blade of fire at the torrent of water flowing into the cloud. The water enveloped the flames, vaporizing them into steam. The ice dragon flapped its wings, condensing a storm of ice and snow. A thick layer of ice formed over the spiraling pillar of water, but the rotational force shattered the ice into fragments. The woman emerged from the surface of the water. "Your cultivation is too weak. What are you trying to do? We'll help you." "I thought you were trapped in the ocean," Stephen said. "We're not amateurs. We're waiting for the cloud to finish absorbing the water." 10 minutes later, a huge spider with tentacles surfaced with a splash and transformed into a middle-aged man. "The coon bird is in the sea. It was too far away, so I only saw its shadow, but its aura is unmistakable." The coon bird was an ancient beast. The stronger the beast, the more adaptable it was to their environment. The coon bird preferred to be alone, and it never responded to Killian's call. "Did you see anything resembling a relic?" the woman asked. "No, I couldn't go too far. The coon bird was blocking the path up ahead. There was another 300 miles to go before our destination. I heard the appearance of treasures causes strange phenomena. Let's wait a bit longer. If the Asura King's golden body really does exist, it'll have its own consciousness. It won't let us take it away." Everyone hovered over the ocean, quietly watching the cloud absorb the water. They didn't have to wait for long for the sun to rise. When the sunlight broke through the clouds in the sky, the ocean returned to its sapphire color. The exposed beach was larger than the night before, which meant that the water level had dropped significantly. They weren't sure where the water had gone, so they didn't carelessly approach the ocean. As they flew over the water at a safe distance, an enormous shadow appeared below them. Among the woman's companions, the middle-aged man had an extraordinary perception of the sea, and he could see beyond the surface. The closer the bird approached, the clearer it became. "The coon bird is following us. We have a low chance of winning if it attacks." Stephen estimated the coon bird's size from its shadow. It was 100 times bigger than the blue whale. He took out the Book of Life, condensed his spiritual energy at the tip of his finger, and drew a symbol on the golden scroll. The Book of Life recorded every life form in the universe, including the creatures in the vast ocean. The two words Northern Ocean appeared on the scroll. According to legends, the coon bird was a beast with the characteristics of a bird and a fish living in the Northern Ocean of the Asura realm. Its body spanned thousands of miles, and it could absorb all the water in the ocean with a single breath. Whenever a storm passed by, the coon bird would leave the depths of the sea and fly in the rain and violent winds. "Beasts can evolve," Vivian said. "If the coon bird is an ancient beast, it should be much stronger than back then. What if it's the guardian of the relic we're looking for?" Stephen had the same thought. The coon bird might have actually been the Asura King's mount. "We'll leave that problem to the beasts. This is their test, not ours." A picture of the coon bird appeared on the scroll, but the woman and her companions weren't interested. Beasts had a special understanding of each other's strengths that human didn't. The woman intentionally changed directions. As she predicted, the shadow followed. The coon bird didn't attack, but its aura was impossible to ignore. Their group stopped in the middle of the ocean. This was the destination marked on the map. There was nothing on the surface, which meant that the relic was in the depths. The massive shadow opened its mouth, and pillars of water shot into the sky. The woman and her companions transformed back into their original forms and dove into the water, prepared for a fierce battle. The surface of the ocean was quickly dyed red with blood. "Should we help them?" Vivian asked. "Let's save our energy," Stephen said. "They're too fast. We might accidentally injure them if we're not careful." Based on Stephen's understanding of the hierarchy of beasts, each clan had a different ranking. For example, even though the Dragon Clan and the Snake Clan were both beasts, the dragons were ranked higher. Even if a dragon and a snake had the same level of cultivation, the snake would be pressured by an instinctive fear of the superior clan, which would prevent them from fighting at full strength. This was a concept known as bloodline suppression. The woman and her companions were members of a unique clan, but they were definitely inferior to the coon bird. The coon bird swung its tail, whipping a few of the women's companions out of the water. Their bodies were covered in blood. Stephen quickly gave them medicinal pills to stop the bleeding. "You're no match for it. We should fall back and come up with another plan." Before they could make a decision, the coon bird leaped out of the water. Two gigantic wings extended from its scales on its back, and it swooped towards them. The ice dragon flew into the cover of clouds. A shower of fireballs set off explosions along the surface of the water. Stephen looked down. The woman and her companions had no plans of retreating. "Why are they so stubborn?" "Battles are thrilling to beasts," the ice dragon explained. "Their injuries aren't too severe. They won't run until the end." Stephen took out the furnace and used his spiritual energy to morph the flames into a chain. He tossed it at the coon bird, wrapping it around one of its wings. A burning smell filled the arena. The coon bird's head whipped around and locked onto Stephen's location in the clouds. It opened its mouth, shooting balls of energy into the sky before flying towards the ice dragon. Stephen had only wanted to assist the woman and her companions. He didn't want to take over the fight. The chain of fire tightened, but it didn't do much damage to the coon bird. Its feathers were like a shield, and they could detach at any time. The ice dragon increased its speed to the maximum, circling through the clouds. Stephen summoned the Killen's phantom behind them. The coon bird didn't slow down. It flew straight into the Killen, dispersing its flames. The Killen's body reformed in the next second, but it was useless. Only the flames from the furnace had an effect. Stephen instantly regretted provoking the coon bird. Drawing its attention was easy, but shaking it off was another story. The woman and her companions took advantage of the coon bird's distraction to regroup and launch another attack. "We'll distract it," the woman called out. "Find the relic in the ocean. It should be right below us." Stephen had no choice but to agree. He had less of a chance of surviving the coon bird than the beasts. The ice dragon froze the surface of the ocean, and the ice extended towards the depths. Stephen summoned the threadworms, and they started to burrow into the ice. His method was a bit clumsy, but he couldn't risk touching the water, and the iridescent dragon's bubble wouldn't last long against the pressure of the depths. Stephen looked up at the battle in the sky. It took time to burrow through the ice, and there was no telling how long the woman and her companions would last. The coon bird had noticed the threadworms when they appeared. It released a sound wave towards the surface of the ocean and shattered the ice, but it couldn't reach the frozen layer in the depths. The coon bird transformed into a young man. With his smaller size, he broke out of the encirclement and dove for Stephen. The other beasts also took on human forms and tried to block him. The beasts turned into a fight of bare fists. The woman and her companions' energy reserves were declining rapidly, and they wouldn't last much longer. But the threadworms excelled at tunneling. They burrowed thousands of feet into the ice within minutes and reached a muddy layer. Because of the mental interference from the ocean, Stephen couldn't form a visual connection with threadworms. He had to rely on their descriptions to understand what was at the bottom. "There's mud and a beam of light. There's one area where it doesn't shine. Do you feel anything else down there?" Stephen asked. "There's no creatures around. It's a stable geological environment." Stephen trusted their judgment. The ocean depths were dark, but cultivators and beasts should still be able to make a rough outline of their surroundings. According to the threadworm's description, there was a part of the depths where light couldn't penetrate. An explosion in the sky interrupted his thoughts. The beasts were at their limit. Stephen waved them over. The lightness area in the depths might be able to hide them from the coon bird. "What did you find?" the woman asked. "There's no time to explain. Just follow me into the sea." The threadworm's tunnel was like a spiraling slide. Stephen, Vivian, and the beast slid to the bottom just as the coon bird's ball of energy crashed into the surface of the ice. "The tunnel collapsed. How are we supposed to get back on land?" one of the beasts asked. "Maybe the relic is the way out," the woman said. Her tone reflected her optimism, which most of them didn't share. When they landed on the mud, they noticed an area that was different from the rest. The bottom of the ocean was pitch black, but a beam of light illuminated their surroundings as it swept past. There was one spot where the light didn't penetrate. This was what the threadworms had found. "I sense a faint spatial disturbance. Let's go in and take a look," the woman suggested. Stephen looked at the darkness with concern. "Aren't you worried you won't be able to come back?" "Unless you want to be killed by that big bird, then stop hesitating and come with us." To the woman and her companions, the overlap of the Bestia and Revenant realms was the most dangerous incident they'd ever heard about. A danger of this scale was nothing to them. Stephen watched the beast step into the darkness and disappear in a ripple of space. At the same time, he felt a surge of aura above them. "The coon bird is headed our way," the ice dragon warned. Stephen glanced at Vivian, who gave him a nod. It was now or never. He summoned the threadworms and the ice dragon back to his spiritual world before entering the darkness with Vivian. Their surroundings blurred and spun, like someone had stuffed them into a washing machine. When they felt the solid ground return, they opened their eyes, but their senses had been thrown into disarray. They couldn't see or sense anything around them. "Where are we?" Stephen's voice echoed as the question left his mouth. "This is an independent space that doesn't belong to any of the 6 realms," the woman replied. "When it was first created, it was probably in a chaotic state. As the creator deepened their comprehension of the laws of nature, the space began to stabilize." She and her companions were knowledgeable and experienced. They had some understanding of each of the 6 realms, even if they'd never visited before. The space didn't match any of them. Stephen was reminded of the independent spaces that Tristan created in Shadows. He crouched and observed the ground. The stones had distinct edges and corners, but each one had the same 5 colors corresponding to the 5 natural elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The creator hadn't developed the space too much, otherwise the elements would have separated. A golden blur of light drew everyone's attention as it moved towards them in the distance. They assumed an offensive stance and prepared for another battle. As the light approached, its true appearance came into view. It looked like a human statue made of gold. To be exact, it resembled a golden husk of a statue that had been hollowed out. Its features were vivid. If its golden surface was replaced with skin, it could pass off as a human. Before Stephen could ask if this was the Asura King's golden body, the statue started laughing. He felt like it was looking directly at him. "I can't remember the last time someone trespassed into this space. Your cultivation is mediocre, and your knowledge is lacking. You're not an Asura." The statue's hand raised, and Stephen was flung backward. The golden statue was left behind by the Asura King when he ascended. It showed mercy to Asuras who trespassed, but every other intruder was to be killed. The Asura King had created this independent space to prevent others from bothering him during his heavenly trial. The space was small, minimally developed, and unstable. The golden statue was created by the Asura King's residual energy that he released while he was undergoing the heavenly trial. It contained some of the Asura King's spiritual energy and had a life force of its own. It was capable of gradually increasing its cultivation based on the Asura King's memories contained in its spiritual energy. The longer the statue stayed in this space, the stronger it would become. Just as Stephen regained his balance, the other beasts were attacked by the golden statue. They relied on their sharp senses and narrowly avoided the blows. Each strike carried a large amount of force behind it. When the wind from the statue's attacks brushed past their skin, they felt like they were being pricked by needles. The woman and her companions took on their original forms and lashed out with their tentacles. The sounds of bodies slamming into each other rang out incessantly. Air currents from the shockwaves made the space even more unstable. Stephen and Vivian stayed away from the conflict. In their eyes, every strike from the golden statue seemed to be a manifestation of the laws of the heavens. They felt compelled to obey rather than resist. "That statue has a profound understanding of this space. How are we supposed to stop it?" Vivian asked. "I don't know, but the spiders aren't afraid. The closer they are to death, the more excited they'll be. Every realm has its own laws. They're a mix of the Bestia and Revenant realms, so they have an understanding of the laws in both realms. The outcome will depend on which of them is stronger." Several hundred moves later, the golden statue remained unharmed. The beasts were strong, but they were only able to temporarily stop its attacks. Because of the statue's unique structure, it didn't have any weaknesses like organs. Its golden husk was essentially a hollow human body. The woman and her companions were no longer as excited as they were before. They'd been mercilessly hit like a punching bag, and the pain was spreading through their muscles and bones. Their skin and flesh were sturdy, but they couldn't completely offset the damage. Stephen threw out the furnace and took the lead. The statue wasn't afraid of fire. As it rushed towards him, flames wrapped around its golden husk and burned brightly, but it couldn't be melted. Stephen ducked behind the furnace and avoided the statue's fatal blow. The furnace released a sound wave, crushing the stones in its path. Stephen created 3 clones and attacked the statue from different directions. The statue casually lifted its arms, snatching the clones as weapons out of their hands. "Is that all the clones you have? This is too easy." "Don't worry, we'll be leaving soon enough. Stephen said, noticing the black vortex in the sky. It was most likely the exit. If they stepped through, they'd be back in the Northern Ocean. If you want to run, feel free to do so. But are you skilled enough to get away from me? When the golden statue destroyed the clones with its fists, the threadworms left Stephen's spiritual world and condensed, forming a storm of iron sand. As the sand piled up on the statue, its body grew increasingly heavy. Stephen gestured to the woman and her companions as they rushed towards the vortex in the sky. The coon bird was an ancient beast, while the Asura King's golden body was a remnant of a spiritual energy he'd left behind during ascension. The relic was a higher-level enemy. Beams of light shot out of the cracks on the hardened layer of sand covering the statue. The iron sand weighed tens of thousands of tons, but it couldn't restrain the statue. By the time the statue broke free, Stephen, Vivian, and the others were already hovering at the edge of the vortex. The woman and her companions weren't prepared to face the Asura King's remnant spiritual energy, and it was impossible to bring the relic back. But the information was valuable. Hopefully, Killian would be lenient and let them stay in the Asura realm. The statue condensed its golden light into a hand. It reached for them, but Stephen, Vivian, and the beasts were faster. They vanished into the vortex. If a husk had this much power, they would have been killed the moment they stepped into the space of the Asura King were here. The icy seawater cleared their minds as they swam along the seabed. When there was no sign of the coon bird, they slowly approached the surface. Fragments of the ice layer that the ice dragon had created were floating on the water. The coon bird had shattered the ice to vent its anger after it lost them. The woman and her companions took on human forms once they reached the shore. Exhaustion was written all over their faces. That spatial rift isn't going anywhere. We'll pass on the information to the celestial beast, and that'll be it for the test. We've already done our best. Before they had a chance to relax, a sharp cry sounded from the clouds, sending sound waves crashing into the ocean. A massive shadow passed over them as the coon bird swooped from the sky. It was fast, and they had no chance of escaping. The woman and her companions stood up, ready for a fight to the death. Stephen and Vivian weren't as enthusiastic. They hung back as they regretted their life choices. Just as the coon bird was about to reach the shore, a flash of light erupted and set off an explosion, steering it off course. Its large feathers drifted over the ocean. When the dust settled, Killian appeared with the sky lion behind him. The sky lion waved at Stephen when their eyes met. I knew you wouldn't succeed, but finding the route and scouting the destination is good enough, Killian said to the beasts. Welcome to the realm. The Asura King's golden body was Killian's only source of information to cross between realms. He couldn't leave such an important matter to outsiders. He'd been watching Stephen, Vivian, and the beasts ever since they'd reached the ocean. Stephen flopped onto the sand, feeling like a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He and Vivian were saved. Killian reached the coon bird in a flash and grabbed a handful of feathers, yanking its head and landing a swift kick to its side. The coon bird flailed as it flapped its wings, trying to blow Killian out of the air, but the gust of wind swept past him harmlessly. With no other option, the coon bird sacrificed the features in Killian's grasp and dove into the ocean, fleeing towards the depths. The feathers it left behind turned razor-sharp and slashed at Killian. He deflected them with a wave of his hand. Vivian was impressed. He won so easily, and he didn't even take out his weapon. What did you expect? Stephen said. He suppressed the Asuras, and he's on equal footing with the Asura King. If he joins the Bellantine family, we'll be rich in no time. There's no mission he can't handle. Don't even think about it. Killian looks human, and you can't sense his aura, but he's a god, and gods don't play by anyone's rules. Killian condensed his energy at the tip of his finger. He pointed at the surface of the ocean and drew an arc. The waves parted, forming a straight path to the depths. A black vortex was embedded in the mud on the seabed. The Asura King was surprisingly cautious. He'd created his own space just to prepare for his ascension. Killian reached out with his aura to probe the interior of the vortex. He could feel an existence radiating golden light in the midst of the chaos. It was the relic he'd been searching for, but it wasn't a good idea to fight in a space that someone else had created. Stephen leaped into the air and told Killian about the golden statue. It doesn't have any weaknesses. Are you going to force your way in? There's no need for that. A small, independent space is unstable. It'll crumble if you exert the slightest bit of force. Killian condensed a sphere of light. It extended towards the depths and wrapped around the vortex. The light shone brighter, and the pressure it exerted increased. The vortex lasted a few minutes before it stopped spinning, and the sound of glass shattering rang out. An explosive burst of power erupted, spraying sand, mud, and stones into the sky. When the space fell apart, everything inside flowed out, including the Asura King's golden body. The golden statue locked eyes with Killian and turned into a beam of light, closing the distance in a split second. The statue threw out its fists. The power it contained rippled the water below. Killian calmly stopped the statue's momentum with a hand, but the moment he came in contact with its fist, a golden light crept up his arm and transformed into chains that ran along his skin. The statue laughed maniacally. How are you going to fight now that your arms are crippled? This is nothing but a petty trick. Killian spun on his heel and kicked the statue directly in the abdomen, sending it crashing into the ocean like a shooting star. When Killian landed on the shore with Stephen, the Sky Lion prodded the golden chains snaking around his arms. The spiritual energy inside Killian had stopped circulating, and his body was like an ordinary person's. What is this tattoo? You feel like a human. Killian tousled the Sky Lion's hair. There's nothing to worry about. Did you forget what I am because you've been spending so much time with humans? Whispers sounded behind them. The Sky Lion returned to its original form, curling around Killian, Stephen, and Vivian, and shielding them from prying eyes of the women and her companions. Killian opened his mouth, and a large egg appeared in the sand in a flash of light. The shell cracked, and a young man with long white hair and vibrant beast tattoos crawled out. He was the spitting image of Killian. He was even dressed the same. The young man rolled his shoulders and stretched his joints before diving into the ocean to look for the golden statue. He's like a snake shedding his skin, Vivian remarked in a low voice. He's not affected by the chains anymore, Stephen whispered back, watching the body that Killian had abandoned shrivel up and wither, drifting away in the wind. Killian had created and kept an egg inside him, similar to how the ice dragon and the threadworms were able to store weapons inside themselves, encased in a protective barrier of energy. As a last resort, Killian could abandon his debilitated body and transfer his cultivation to a new one. Stephen wondered if this was a technique unique to beasts or certain inhabitants of the Asura realm. When the Asura king ascended, this might have been the method he'd used to create the golden statue. Minutes after Killian dove into the ocean, the water boiled and sizzled. Bubbles rose to the surface, and steam enveloped the shore. The amount of energy released by Killian in the golden statue's fight had reached unimaginable heights. Should we help him? Stephen asked worriedly. We don't know what's going on down there, and that statue is unpredictable. The Sky Lion tucked its fins at its side, looking relaxed as it settled on the sandy beach. Killian will be fine. The information you gave him about your battle underwater is enough. He'll win. The Sky Lion had been Killian's mount for thousands of years. If he were in danger, the Sky Lion would have been able to sense it. Before coming up with this test for the woman and her companions, Killian wasn't worried about the relic's retaliation. He was more concerned about being trapped by a strange array or another one of the Asura King's techniques. It wasn't easy to kill a god or powerful cultivators, but trapping them for an eternity wasn't as impossible. The woman and her companions were huddled together, whispering to each other. They were seeing Killian in a new light. It's a good thing we didn't flip the table during our discussion. The celestial beast is indeed a god. We're no match for him. The beasts in the Asura realm aren't that much weaker than us. War is common in this realm, and they've been tempering their bodies and evolving through conflict with the Asuras. We didn't get the relic, but the celestial beast is about to get it himself. We paved the path for him, so he won't care about the minor details. They believed that the outcome of the battle had already been decided. Sure enough, Killian emerged from the waves not long after with the golden statue, and the ocean returned to its tranquil state. He shrunk the statue into the size of a trinket on his palm. Their journey back to the Myriad Mountains was smooth. Killian gave one of the cities at the foot of the mountain to the woman and her companions. There would be certain regulations they'd have to follow, but the rules were lenient, and they were readily accepted. With that settled, Stephen relayed Vivian's request to Killian. As the celestial beast and ruler of the Asura realm, the decision to send beasts to other realms was up to him. The Elysian realm is far, Killian said. If the beasts run into any trouble, I won't be able to help them. I can't risk their lives for a wealthy family we have no connection with. It's not the same as the Mystic Covenant. The faction's name and their tokens serve as protection, but a wealthy family doesn't have that kind of influence. The Ballantine family's information network is top-notch, Stephen explained. Some of the Asuras have moved on to the Elysian realm. The Mystic Covenant's up to date with recent events, but there is some information that can't be obtained through regular means. You'll be at a disadvantage if you have less intel than the Asuras. Killian thought it over and decided to ask 4 of the divine turtles in the Asura realm to assist the Ballantine family. They had high defenses, and they didn't like to move around too much. Staying at Vivian's mansion as decoration wasn't that different from their lives here. If there was something the divine turtles couldn't handle, they could always ask Stephen for help. The divine turtles transformed into 4 elderly men with deep auras and greeted Vivian. "Thank you for helping us," she said gratefully. "Don't mention it. It's been a long time since we've gone out. This is a good opportunity for us to experience the Elysian realm." While they were talking, Killian turned to Stephen and lowered his voice. "I didn't think you'd enter this strange space with the beasts. You're too reckless for your own good. I suppose this is where you get your courage from. I was surprised when the Skyline told me that you chose to participate in the City Lord Challenge when your competitors are so much stronger than you. Do you really not want to become a City Lord? You're 1 round away. I can ask the Skylion and some of the stronger beasts to go back to the Elysian realm with you and help you." "Thanks, but I only participated to help out the Sullivan family," Stephen said. "My job is done. Besides, the participants will be going all out during the 3rd round. Some of them have complex arrays specifically designed to trap beasts. I don't want them getting injured." "Are you that close to the Sullivan family? If they fail the 3rd round, your efforts would have been for nothing, and you'll lose the chance to become a city lord." "It's fine. I'm not interested in the position." When everything was settled, Stephen took Vivian, the divine turtles, and the beasts from the abyss back to the Elysian realm. The woman wanted to head back to the abyss and bring her other companions to the Asura realm. The tense atmosphere in the Elysian realm hadn't lessened while Stephen was away. Entry into the cities was strict. Cultivators had to verify their identities before entering. Everyone was on guard after the infinite prison was attacked. Stephen sighed as he looked at the commissioned post outside the city gate in the Haven domain. They didn't even include a picture of the suspects. "Why don't you tell the Zenith Council what you know?" the woman asked. "There's no point. The ancient cultivators have been on the wanted list for a long time. Neither the Mystic Covenant nor the Zenith Council has ever taken decisive action." "Well, that's none of our business. We're going back to the polar domain. If you ever need our help, come to the Asura realm." "Wait!" Stephen stopped the woman before she could leave with her companions. "What's the bottom of the abyss like? The infinite prison's underground compartment with the cells fell inside. Is there any chance the prisoners survived?" Over the years, many cultivators had descended into the depths to investigate, but no one had ever returned alive. There wasn't much information about the abyss. "The most dangerous part of the abyss is the turbulence from the spatial rifts," the woman explained. "The tunnels inside each one have overlapped and formed a river of spatial fragments. We crossed over to the Elysian realm through one of the larger fragments. The edges of a spatial fragment are sharper than any weapon. They're laced with the power of the laws of nature. Nothing can exist in 2 spaces at the same time. Anything that touches the edge will be torn to pieces, including the metallic compartment from the prison. The walls surrounding the abyss are damp, cold, and smooth. The prisoners are beasts like us. It wouldn't be possible for them to hang on for long periods of time. If you want my opinion, they're probably already dead." "What was the point in detonating the prison then? The ancient cultivators don't do anything that doesn't benefit them." "Wait for the culprits to be found. Then you'll find out what they were after." The woman and her companions waved goodbye and disappeared into the crowd. Vivian set off for Minori City with the 4 divine turtles. Stephen didn't go with them. He headed for Ren's courtyard in the bamboo forest to see Kim. Ren's students surrounded him the second he arrived and started teasing him. "I heard you've been demoted. You can't slack off at Mr. Wren's home anymore. If you want to come in, you'll have to serve us tea and water." Stephen laughed. "Don't forget that my wife is still Mr. Wren's student. I'm not a complete outsider." "Are you here to cultivate for once? You have a lot of beasts on your side. You can become a city lord if you want to." "I'm here to see my wife and to do business," Stephen replied. "I've been the honorary director of Mariah's factory for a while, but I haven't done anything with my title." The heirs of the top 4 wealthy families in the Haven domain had given Stephen a mine of fire crystals in exchange for his help during the challenge. This was his chance to make good use of it. Under his fellow students' curious gazes, he took out a contract and showed it to them. At first, they didn't know what the contract was for, but they were surprised when they looked it over. The wealth of the mine was on par with a typical wealthy family in the Haven domain. "Your cultivation is average, but you have a knack for making deals. You don't have to be the city lord to get rich. When your business takes off, we'll drop by the factory and support you." "I'll keep you posted," Stephen said. At the pavilion, he sensed a familiar yet unfamiliar aura. Kim was sitting cross-legged in a meditative state. Her aura had deepened. She'd already broken through to the true immortal realm and ascended. She was no longer a stowaway in the Elysian realm. "I wasn't expecting you to ascend while I was away." "It's thanks to Wren. After I reached the true immortal realm 3 days ago, everything happened so fast that I didn't have time to prepare. Wren set up a defensive array in the forest to minimize the damage, and he helped me pass my heavenly trial without injury." While Stephen was in the Asura realm, Kim had ascended without him knowing. He was proud of her. She'd come a long way. After congratulating Kim and catching up, Stephen told her about the finalized business plan he'd come up with based on the preparations she'd made before she came to the Elysian realm. The human realm's technology was far ahead of every other realm. All they needed were sufficient resources to produce high-end weapons and equipment suitable for large-scale battles. Stephen and Kim traveled south and found the mountains where the mine of fire crystals was located. At the foot of the mountain were luxurious villas and mansions owned by the 4 heirs. Stephen summoned the threadworms. They led him and Kim through a lush forest as they searched for the mine. Stephen took out the contract and reread it. It didn't seem like much of a bargain when he first signed it, but now that his business was underway, the mine was priceless. The mountain range had 7 main peaks. The mine with fire crystals was the most valuable, but there were other mineral veins around. The threadworms took them to the edge of a deep pit. There were dark red crystals embedded in the stones below. Based on their size and color, they were high quality, just like what the contract had stated. The more pure the crystal was, the more unstable its energy would be. If the mining tools accidentally hit the stone a little too hard during excavation, a violent explosion could be accidentally triggered. This meant that the miners had to be skilled and experienced to get the job done safely. The threadworms confidently declared that this was their specialty. Mining was easier than fighting. Before Kim ascended, she'd retracted her clone from the human realm. She created another one to bring a batch of fire crystals to the head researcher of weapons and equipment development at Annapolis's Underground Research Institute. During the next few days, the desolate mountain was bustling with activity. Stephen had opened a spatial rift to transport one of the U.S. factories' assembly lines and robots to the mountain. The beasts staying at the Mystic Covenant's luxurious apartments were starting to get restless ever since the 3rd round was postponed. When they heard about Stephen's factory, they offered to dig a cave for the machinery and guard the mountain as an excuse to stretch their limbs in the wilderness. An endless stream of leather armor, armed guards, and combat boots were being produced with the fire crystals the threadworms excavated from the mine. Stephen brought the head researcher of weapon and equipment development to his team in the Elysian realm to check on the factory. They were ordinary humans, and the abundant spiritual energy in the environment made them dizzy. "I feel like I'm drunk," the head researcher slurred. "Is there poison in the air in this realm?" Stephen laughed and patted his shoulder reassuringly. "There's nothing like that. I would never take you somewhere dangerous. Our weapons wouldn't have advanced so quickly if it weren't for your talent and passion. The spiritual energy in the Elysian realm is much higher than in our world. You'll get used to it soon." As Stephen had said, the dizzying sensation lifted after half an hour as their bodies adapted to the environment. The head researcher and their team began their inspection of the factory and the cave. The leather armor had special padding around the chest area to protect the heart. An AI chip had been stitched between layers. The head researcher gave Stephen a smartwatch. There's no signal tower or satellite in this realm, so the chip is only affected within 5 miles. When you're selling your products, ask the customer to put on the armor so their information can be recorded in the watch. Stephen touched the leather armor with his hand. The fabric was lightweight and durable. It had been made with fire crystals, dark gold, and ice iron. Fire crystals amplified the owner's strength. Dark gold prevented daily wear and tear, and the ice iron increased resistance. He was confident that if he sold these products at a suitable price, they would definitely become popular. Stephen clenched his fist and punched in the front of the armor with 20% of his strength. The armor wasn't damaged. It was so sturdy that it wouldn't break even if he used 40%. He was satisfied with the result. The next step was to publicize his products at an auction. No one paid attention to Stephen's factory in the mountains. Wealthy families across the realm were training the participants they were backing during the City Lord Challenge. To start off, Stephen took a sample of the leather armor to Amethyst Auction House. It wasn't a rare treasure, but this was the only sales channel he knew about. The CEO of Amethyst Auction House had left the management of the business to his grandson, Holden Ruiz. Stephen had met him a few times during the challenge. Unfortunately, they weren't enemies. In the lobby, the manager, who was dressed in formal attire and full of energy, came over to greet Stephen. "Welcome to Amethyst Auction House's headquarters, Mr. Adams. What can we do for you?" The man seemed to know who he was, but Stephen didn't recognize him. "Do we know each other?" The manager gave him a hearty laugh before introducing himself. "I'm the manager of Amethyst Auction House's headquarters. I've heard a lot about you. The CEO's grandson told me you helped him a lot during the challenge, and that if there's ever a chance in the future, he'd like to repay you." In their profession, it was important to be in the know. It wasn't strange for the manager to know Stephen's identity. In the manager's office, Stephen set the armor on the desk to show him the product. The craftsmanship was exquisite, but compared to other similar items on the market, it was inferior. Holden had warned the manager in advance not to antagonize Stephen. The City Lord Challenge hadn't ended yet, and having one more friend was better than having one more enemy. "It just so happens that there will be an auction the night after tomorrow," the manager said carefully. "We can display your products, but it's hard to say if they'll be sold or not. Do you have a starting price in mind?" 2,000 purple gold coins. The manager glanced at the leather armor. That sounded like the cost of the materials used to make it. Stephen had to be an amateur in business. If his starting price was the cost price, he wouldn't be making a profit. But the manager couldn't criticize him for his lack of experience in the business industry. He went along with it. If no one bid at an auction, he would raise the price to 10,000 purple gold coins. At the very least, he would buy 2 pieces so that Stephen wouldn't lose face. A group of cultivators were loitering at the end of the street. They were members of the Mercenary Guilds Alliance, and they'd been watching Amethyst Auction House ever since they saw Stephen walk inside. The Mystic Covenant, Amethyst Auction House's headquarters, and the Mercenaries' headquarters were located close to one another. The 3 guild leaders hadn't sent any more mercenaries to the human realm, but that didn't mean their grudges with Stephen had been settled. "He's finally back. This is our chance. He doesn't stay at the Mystic Covenant's headquarters or their apartments. We should contact the guild leaders and let them know. We can't let him escape this time." The 3 guild leaders had been busy lately. Before the City Lord Challenge resumed, the participants had been putting in requests for the mercenaries to eliminate their competitors in exchange for a generous reward. The Mercenary Guilds Alliance was a neutral organization, so it wasn't cheating to commission them. The guilds had sent mercenaries across the realm to complete the commissions. The Falcon Guild leader was livid when her subordinates reported that Stephen had returned to the Elysian realm. He was at Amethyst Auction House's headquarters to discuss a deal. Apparently, he'd received a mine of fire crystals from the heirs of the top 4 wealthy families in the Haven domain. They took an interest in someone like him? He probably has some value we don't know about, but we can't target him right now. It's a sensitive time for the 4 heirs. There's a high chance of them winning the 3rd round and becoming the City Lord. Are we going to give up on him? Why would I? We'll start with the people around him first. Check out the mine in the mountains and kill everyone there. Take the advisor from the Thousand Hands Guild with you. Devising an ambush is his specialty. 2 days later, Amethyst Auction House's headquarters held their auction. There was a long line of guests at the entrance, waiting for permission to enter. The goods at Amethyst Auction House had always been high quality, and no one wanted to pass up this chance. Stephen sat alone in the VIP seat. His aura was drowned out by the crowd of cultivators filing into the hall. When every seat in the audience was filled, a beautiful hostess in a gorgeous dress took the stage. Thank you all for coming. I guarantee that at least one of our products will catch your eye. There is something for everyone. Our first item is a fragment of the metallic compartment from the infinite prison in the polar domain. It might look useless at first glance, but it could be an important clue to solving the mystery behind the attack. The starting price is 40 million purple gold coins. Stephen inspected the metallic fragment in the glass case. It looked to be a small part of the walls of the metallic compartment. It seemed that the guards had expanded the range of their search significantly after failing to find the culprit near the prison. They had tried to sneak into the abyss. Stephen wasn't sure if an item with no combat value would be popular, but his doubts were cleared when the audience yelled their bids. 44 million! 47 million! 50 million! After a few rounds of bidding, the final price was 58 million purple gold coins. You look confused. You're too poor to understand how the rich think. Yvonne took a seat next to Stephen without being invited. Members of the Mystic Covenant were usually diligently cultivating whenever they had the chance, but she was an exception. She had all sorts of hobbies to pass the time, and it seemed that one of them was attending auctions. No one knows how the metallic compartment was constructed, Yvonne went on. The method is confidential, including the engineer. They're interested in the product because they want to improve the mansion's defenses. This is a concern of the rich. I see. Stephen took another look at the metallic fragment on stage. It suddenly looked valuable. The second item was a black scythe from the malevolent will. The participants of the challenge in the crowd were familiar with it. The City Lord Challenge wasn't broadcasted live, the hostess introduced. I'm sure many of you are curious about the challenges the participants had to face. This is a weapon condensed from negative energy. If the scythe grazes your skin, your consciousness will shut down, and you'll turn into a walking corpse. Whoever wins the bid, please keep this in mind and be careful. The starting price is 15 million purple gold coins. The exaggerated price surprised Stephen, but the other participants in the crowd had expected this. Some of them knew it was impossible for them to win the challenge, so they'd only participated in the first 2 rounds to steal these kinds of items to earn money. That scythe is inseparable from the malevolent will. If it leaves the miasma from the abyss, it'll be purified by nature soon, right? Stephen asked. That's true, but there's probably a few people in the crowd who know how to preserve it, Yvonne explained. It'll be useful for assassinations. While they were whispering to each other, a group of guests sitting in a corner were sneaking glances in their direction. They were mercenaries who'd just confirmed Stephen's location. He was nowhere near the mountains, and this was the perfect time for the advisor from the Thousand Hands Guild to attack the mine. Little did he know that Stephen hadn't employed cultivators to operate his factory in the cave. The robots were managing the production, while the beasts were roaming the mountains for a change of scenery and acting as guards. When the mercenaries set foot on the mountain, the beast would be the hunter and they would be the prey. The third item was an incomplete list of ingredients needed to concoct the Mystic Covenant's potion for an indestructible body. The formula is incomplete, but the medicinal herbs listed are incredibly rare, the hostess said. Even if you win the bid, it'll be difficult to concoct the potion. Whispers broke out below the stage. Who wouldn't be tempted by the Mystic Covenant's strengthening liquid? Even the 3 guild leaders had used all sorts of underhanded tricks to get their hands on it. The wealthy families were itching for a chance to get the formula for themselves. Can you confirm its authenticity? Someone from the crowd shouted. It's incomplete, so there's no guarantee, but we've chosen to auction this item based on our assessment of the identity and background of the supplier. The whispers became louder. Everyone knew that aside from the Mystic Covenant, the ancient cultivators were the only ones who had the real formula. The hostess's reply implied that Amethyst Auction House had a connection with wanted fugitives.